right, everybody. Welcome in this morning to the Bible study. I'm so glad that you could join us, and hopefully today we're going to have a great time together. So, I decided to break up this next chapter a little bit, just because I feel like each item on this chapter really kind of deserves its own reality. So I decided to break that up a little bit. And so these may be a little bit shorter. I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I do think that they each are worthy of their own conversation. I want to give them the credit that they're due, and I don't want to have to rush through them like crazy. So, what Paul is doing here in First Timothy, we're going to be in the third chapter, First Timothy chapter 3, and what Paul is doing here is he's going to have a conversation with Timothy on the leaders and the servants of the church. Okay, that's really what he's going to have a conversation about. The people he calls overseers. Our church would use the word elder there. And so he's going to have a conversation there, and then he's going to have a conversation about deacon, and he's going to lay out some of the qualifications that exist. Now, once again, I want you to remember right now, we are reading this book because of the reality that all of us are involved right now in ministry, right? COVID-19 is a very real reality. And so we're all involved in ministry. Like, our churches aren't gathering together in large format at this point. We will be encouraging eventually the house church thing. Most likely when we enter into phase 4 in Illinois, we will be encouraging the house church thing where you gather together with, a small group of people, and maybe there's some people from church there, people that you know and love from church, and people that you know and love that you're trying to invest in and help them find Jesus as well. And so in saying that, what I'm really saying is that these qualifications for overseers and these qualifications for deacons, while there is a church-wide application here, as far as the congregation goes, there is an application here in your home, because you are going to be acting as such for the time at hand. And so I think it's important for us to always keep that at the forefront of our minds. And honestly, these qualifications, even though not every person has been called to become an elder, and not every person has been called to become a deacon, right? Not every person is. We should still strive to meet these qualifications. They are really important, good qualifications, and they mark a life that has definitely been walking the discipleship journey for quite some time, and hopefully it's something that we all aspire to become a better, more intentional, well-deserving disciple of Jesus. And so I just wanted to throw that out there before we got too far into this. I want you to know that just because you may not currently hold the title of elder or the title of deacon, it doesn't mean that this conversation doesn't apply to you. In fact, I would say it applies all the more to you, because you help us also choose those people, and you're present in that conversation. And once again, every person, I believe, should strive for these qualities. So let's read them. 1 Timothy chapter 3. I'm going to read through them, and then we're going to talk about them, and it'll be a good old time. Okay? So this is what it says. It says, "This saying is trustworthy." Paul uses that over and over again in these letters. I love it, his trustworthy sayings. "The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, and able to teach. Not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone doesn't know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he might not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil." Okay, so let's start at the beginning and let's talk about this for a second. First of all, Paul says that it's a noble task, right? That aspiring to the office of the overseer is a noble task. And just because you aspire to something actually doesn't mean that you're going to get there. That's kind of in line with what I was saying. I believe every person should aspire to match this list of qualities that's listed out here for us, and overseers and elders and deacons. I think that that's a really important thing. And as Paul says, it is a noble task for us to do that. This is my last pot of home roasted coffee beans before I went on isolation from my family, which means that tomorrow I have to drink purchased coffee beans, and the coffee beans I have on hand is from a company I've never had their coffee before, and that makes me nervous. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm sure. I mean, I don't buy junk beans, so I'm hoping that it's as good as I hope that it will be. All right, verse 2. Okay, he says the overseer must be above reproach. Now, that's a very interesting reality, and really, I think above reproach feeds into everything else. Okay, because if you're above reproach, what that really means is that like there's really not anything bad to be said about you, right? Like that's the overarching principle I think that exists here. If you're above reproach, then you're somebody about whom like only positives are being said. There's nothing really negative, that's happening. I mean, yeah, there's going to be some people who might not, personalities collide, and there may be some people who don't prefer your personality. But at the end of the day, everyone pretty much agrees that you are following Jesus, that you are who you say you are, that they can take you at face value, and there's nothing really lingering in the background in your closet. So you must be above reproach, okay? The Bible says here, the husband of one wife. Every time I read that, I think about my friend Matt Proctor, he was one of my professors when I was in college. We became really close, and just a man I admire. And he would always say, the thing that he would always say in this is that the original language really here means is more of a one woman man. Is really more of what this says here. And this is a directive. There is a gender directive that's happening here, which means that eldership, we would take that to mean that eldership typically is a male-centric reality, right? And so which is why at FCC we have male eldership. That's why we've chosen that, is because we believe that the Bible here, like I said, the last conversation we had in chapter 2, there were some cultural realities at play. In chapter 3, this doesn't seem to be a cultural reality that's at play. In chapter 3, it seems more to be a perpetual directive of the church. So a one-woman man. Now, does that mean that someone who's been divorced could never be an elder? Not necessarily. I don't believe that that's necessarily true because this never really speaks about divorce per se. Now, if you have somebody who is a person of divorce who has never gone through the healing process from that, who has never really dealt with the personal and biblical ramifications of that, right? Who've never walked through that process, and they are still bitter, maybe from that process, or whatever it may be. That person might not be the wisest choice for an elder. But if you have somebody who, let's say someone was married and they were divorced for whatever reason, and it was a really bad relationship, and maybe they share fault for that, right? Because obviously most of the time in relationships that fail, the fault is shared in some proportion. And so maybe they share fault in that, but they've dealt with that. They've dealt with those emotions. Maybe now they're even remarried, and the marriage that they're in now is really, really strong and biblical. Well, then that changes some things, right? That person now would look like a one woman man. That would be a person who has partnered with somebody for a lifetime. And so there's a lot of things at play there. But what I would say is that divorce doesn't necessarily discredit you from what the Bible is saying here. What discredits you is to be somebody who is in a disharmonious relationship. That would be the discrediting fault here, right? Sober-minded, it says here, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, and able to teach, not a drunkard. All right, so let's talk about these for a second. And so obviously, as a person who is helping to make decisions for many people, that sober-minded thing really makes a lot of sense, right? You don't want somebody who panics at with every decision, or somebody who's incredibly indecisive, right? And, like if you can't decide what color of shoes to put on with your pants today, like you probably shouldn't be an elder, right? If you can't decide what route to take to work, like there has to be some ability to make decisions, right? Some ability to make decisions. And if you're always only emotionally led, right? Or if you're always only robotic, you're not very sober minded at that point. We've got to have somebody who can focus well there. Self controlled, once again, speaks into this greatly. People who lose emotional control whenever you're dealing with leadership and this authority in the church, that's a real problem. Respectable, I think that should go without saying, because if you're not worthy of respect, why in the world would you receive an office like this within the community of faith? Hospitable, which means you need to be approachable, right? You need to be welcoming to people. And if you're not, how can you prove your love for people if you're not willing to be among them and have them among you? Able to teach, I think that that's a really important distinctive there, because what a lot of people will say is, well, they're an elder, they should be teaching. No, that's not what Paul's saying. Paul says that they need to have the ability to teach. The ability to teach is very, very different than the ongoing action of teaching, right? Some people, like Scripture talks about the gift of teaching, right? Which is a role that I would fall into. To be an elder, you don't have to fall into that role, okay? And so you need to be aware of that. Able to teach and having the gift of teaching is a very different reality. It says, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. And what you really see there, right, is it needs to be a person who's not of excess, right? Not an excessive person. So a drunkard is a person who who drinks to excess. Someone who is violent is a person who allows their emotions to control them to excess. Someone who is quarrelsome also allows their emotional state to control them to excess. A lover of money, obviously, right, has to have life to excess. And so you need to be a person who can control that part of you, right? It's not what these guidelines aren't doing. Okay, they aren't saying like your personality has to be this. What they're saying is that you have to have enough self-control, right? You have to have enough self-control that if you are a person who takes everything to the nth degree, you have to have enough self-control to know when enough is enough. Verse 4 says he must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. And that has been grossly misused. What people have taken that to mean for the longest time is that their kids must be perfect. And so what happens is, and I've seen this a lot as a person who's worked in the church for a long time, is I will have a person who I know, looking into their life, like they meet the qualifications of elders, but for whatever reason, right? For whatever reason, maybe their children are adults and they've fallen away from the Lord, and they'll say, "See, my kids are not submissive," and that's not at all what this is saying. What this is saying is, right, when it says, the bigger directive here is managing your household well, and really that is, if anything in this list is cultural, that is the item that's cultural, because in this day, a household was not just the family unit. A household was the family unit plus servants plus livestock plus the family business plus all of these realities, right, that exist out there. And this doesn't have to do with necessarily the pure obedience of your children and them remaining in faith forever. I mean, obviously we all hope that for our kids, but what this has to do more with is successful in family dealings, is the bigger picture that exists here. The reality is that you can do everything right as a parent. You can, and I've seen it. You can do everything right as a parent, and your child can become an adult on their own standing, and they can just walk away from it. They can. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have failed them. Okay, so keep that in mind. Verse 6, he must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Interesting that the recent convert thing doesn't really have anything to do with biblical knowledge. Isn't that interesting? Like, our assumption would be, well, we wouldn't want someone new to be an elder because we don't know that they really understand like everything the Bible teaches. And that's not at all what it has to do with. It has to do with the conceit of being chosen for leadership too early. So there's this time thing that needs to be in there, where someone needs to have wrestled with faith long enough that by the time they obtain the office of elder, they understand the weight with which it comes. Moreover, it says, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he might not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. In other words, if your elders have a good relationship with the church and a bad relationship with the community, then their good relationship with the church is tainted, right? And so your elders need to be people who are above reproach, not only inside the church walls, but also outside of the church walls. Otherwise, it's very, very likely that your elder will fall into disgrace, which also places your church and your Savior into the same line of disgrace. All right, so that is Paul's conversation on eldership. Tomorrow we're going to tackle deacons, not literally tackle them. That would be fun, but it would hurt. But we're going to have a conversation about deacons, and then we'll move on from there. Thanks for watching. Love you guys. Have a blessed rest of